your screen. If everybody hasn't already, please mute yourself. Our guest this evening is Kramer. She is going to be presenting for us tonight on the journey of nature photography, some of her experiences there. Anne has been a longtime Redlands Camera Club member, and she just found out in November that she had placed in the top 250 winners in the categories of the annual showcase contest through NAMPA. The top 7% of 3,230 entries, and the top 250 winners of Share the View annual contest in the top 10% of there. So she has consistently produced some beautiful work that has been recognized nationally. And I've just been in awe of her images as she has shared them with the club and on her website. And so, Anne, we're looking forward to seeing what you got. Thank you so much.
Hey, great. Thank you. Are you seeing everything okay?
Everything's looking great on this end.
Okay. Well, hello. I'm going to say a little bit about myself because some of you are new, and then I'll launch in. And before I do, I really want to express my appreciation to Bruce and Russ and Carl for their support and for inviting me. I'm honored to be a speaker here. And hopefully this will just blend right into Dave's class, Dave Fick's class. So you'll get all the things you need to know. So I thought, first of all, I would just tell people a little bit about how I got into all of this craziness, because if I looked at it 10 years ago, I would have never guessed that I'd be doing this sort of thing. So I want to tell you a little bit. I asked my husband, tell me something interesting about me. I don't think I'm all that interesting. And he said, well, you have a kind of strange relationship with animals. And that hit the spot. When I grew up in Wisconsin. I was there till I was 20. And as a kid, I used to sit on the fence and sing to the cows. So that should tell you a little bit about me. I'm a little out there. And of course, my favorite song was How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? I think some of you might remember that song. And so that's where I was with wildlife early on. I guess that was the wildest life that you had in Wisconsin. And of course, then, you get busy, and I had a full-time practice, and we became backyard bird habitat folks, and we kind of went a little crazy, and I got my first point and shoot. And then I thought I'd move up to a DSLR, which was very disappointing because the point and shoot just gives you everything right there visually. And then you go to a DSLR and you have to start editing. And and that was like a real shock. And I think my first camera was a Canon Rebel T5i and a Sigma Tamron, maybe 30 to 300. That was where I started with the DSLR business. And around 2015, I had the opportunity I used to watch an osprey nest that was online, and it was through Hog Island, which is in Maine, and it's an Audubon camp. So I had the opportunity to go to Maine and take a photography workshop with Melissa Grew, who had just won the first place Audubon photography contest that year. And I got bit really bad with the wildlife bug there, and she's very similar in nature to me. I think I could see she just loves wildlife, and so it was a good fit for me. And then when I came back, I started to look at, places that I could go, where I could see birds. So I started looking for places to see sandhill cranes and burrowing owls and fox and grebes. And gosh, I went to Lodi, and I'm having trouble seeing my notes here. Is there a way that I can reduce the uh, okay, I think I can see better. So I think I started going to Lodi, California. I went to Whitewater Draw in Arizona, the Platte River in Nebraska, which was huge. I mean, it's probably the Platte River in Nebraska was probably one of my top 5 experiences in life. And if you ever get a chance to go, when you see the sky just covered with thousands and thousands of birds coming in and leaving, it's just awesome. Bosque del Apache, and different locations in California, Utah, Oregon. I finally started going to places like Yosemite and Grand Teton, and then Yellowstone. And the farthest I've gone is Scotland and India. And I would take workshops with photographers, some wildlife photographers and some landscape. But every time I took a workshop with a landscape photographer, within an hour, I was over by a tree photographing birds. So I figured out that that probably was my calling. so so I moved on. This is my first experience at the Platte River. This is the fly-in. And this is really nothing. The sky darkens. The birds are so massive at the Platte River. And this is a little closer up at Bosque del Apache, where I know many of the photographers here have gone, of the sandhill crane. This was Scotland, where we were able to get pretty close to the puffins. The puffins were interesting because I'm not accustomed to getting that close to birds, but because they have Jaegers, which are sort of parasitic birds that fly overhead, and they disrupt their dens and even take the sand eels that they bring to the dens. The puffins like it when the humans are pretty close. So we were able to get, a couple of feet away and get some good shots of the Atlantic puffins. And that was at the Isle of Lunga in Scotland. So I started getting into this crazy wildlife stuff. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about, like, what is it that makes wildlife so compelling and addictive for people? Because a lot of people get into it, get just jazzed by it. And I think part of it is that, there's some challenges that happen in wildlife. And just like anything, when you take on something that's hard and you overcome it, there's a sort of thrill that happens. And so it becomes kind of thrilling. But at the same time, it's difficult and there's problems that come up. So I'll tell you one of them that came up was I had, on that very trip to Maine, I had my new, I don't know if anyone remembers the Canon 7D Mark II and the 100-400 lens that came out around that time. I think it was around 8 years ago. And so I carted off across the country with my new camera and my new lens. And this was like the state of the art now in wildlife photography. And I think it was a 5-day workshop. And about the 4th day, my camera broke. And I did not have a backup camera, and neither did other people. So I'm at this workshop, and I'm on an island, and I can't get any place to get my camera repaired. And this is something I think that is more common for wildlife photographers than for other photographers, maybe landscape. But because the cameras are heavier, if you don't have a backup camera, you're out of luck. Okay. And then little things that happened, like a harrier that I missed kind of driving into the wetlands one morning and picked up my camera and took some shots and looked down, and everything was the wrong settings because I had it set for the night before. And so you have to be ready at the time that you get out to see wildlife, because it's just going to happen. And if you don't have everything set and ready in your car on the way in, you will probably miss something. And then, it's always good to remember to charge your batteries and to have a card in. There was one time that I had to walk across some water to get to a place where a kingfisher was. I got all set and went to take a shot, and the battery went dead on me because I hadn't charged it. So these are some of the mishaps that happen that you don't have when you're in studio. And as I said, I find wildlife photography exciting. I think it's energizing, and I think it's refreshing to the body and the mind. Just getting out in nature is rejuvenating. And as an older person, I also find that you rediscover some of your capabilities when you're out in nature, like what you're made of. And that can be very confidence building. I think also there's a sense of wonder that happens when you're out in nature, because it's like the sandhill cranes have been around, I think, for hundreds and thousands of years. There's a book called On Ancient Wings, because they are an ancient breed. And so it's like standing in front of a big sequoia tree and just being awestruck with how things have survived for all this time, and hopefully will survive after us. I also find wildlife kind of interesting and full of surprises. You really never know what's going to happen, who's going to swoop down and attack whom, what kind of mating you're going to see, and that's interesting and it keeps you on your toes. All the challenges that go on with wildlife photography are very surmountable, and all you need is a little bit of perseverance and preparation. So I'm going to go through some of that today with you. I'm going to go through the things you need to know to be ready for this. And with all the challenges that you have, let's face it, there's nothing like looking in the face of a great gray owl. So let me start with what. I'm going to do what, when, where, how, and why. And beginning with what, I want to talk a little bit to you about what is it that you want to photograph, and how do you determine that? How do you find what it is you want to photograph, and what are the best subjects to photograph? And do you have to travel to get good images? Those are all the what. So let's start with that. So this is a backyard image. This could be taken anywhere. It's a Cooper's hawk. I believe it's a Cooper's hawk because they're really hard to tell from a sharp-shinned hawk, but I believe it's a Cooper's. And Cooper's hawks are everywhere. So you don't have to go to Grand Teton to get a good hawk image. You can do it in your backyard. You can do a lot of beautiful birds and even mammals in your backyard. Is that what you want to do? And that's fine. You don't have to spend a lot of money. If you like exotic wildlife, you can go to the zoo. I think this was taken at the safari park or San Diego Zoo, I can't recall. But there's quite a few exotic species there. Is it lions and tigers you want to photograph? That's fine too. This is Kanha National Park in India. Or bears. And of course, there's lots of bears up in Grand Teton and Yellowstone. And black bears are a little more common to find than grizzlies. So how do you decide what it is that you want? You can have a focus species in mind, and a lot of people do that. They decide that they have a wish list of something they want to see. Maybe it's the red-crowned cranes in Japan, maybe it's bears, and maybe it's from things you've seen on Facebook or Instagram, a program at RCC. Or are you kind of a meanderer? Meanderers are, I'm just going to go out and shoot and see what I find today and be open to whatever pops up. I think sometimes those are people who like to wander and be an explorer and like to be surprised. What's better? I think a little bit of both. So I think it's a good idea to have something in mind when you go out, but to be very open to whatever it is that comes your way and not to be too focused one way or another. Sometimes we get really focused on one species and we miss things because we're here to photograph this. And so we're not really experiencing what's going on around us. And sometimes we're just missing an awful lot. It's kind of nice for me when I have my husband along because he's looking at things that I don't see. And it just makes me realize when I'm over here, there's something going on over here. And all of those things are just for the mill. You can also just be so open to everything that you don't focus and stay long enough. And I found that when you stay on something for a while, that's when you start to get a better idea of how to get good shots with it. If whatever the species is getting comfortable with you, you're going to get more interesting shots. Nature can be pretty unpredictable, and whatever is going on for you or someone yesterday will be different the next day. So you can't count on things repeating. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a Yellowstone example that I heard about. I was up in Yellowstone in January a couple of years ago with a guide for 4 days. Someone had to cancel, so I had the guide all to myself, and so we were talking about, what I wanted to see, and I really like red fox in the snow. I just find them very beautiful, but they're elusive. So he was talking about, well, are you just focused on that? And I said, no, I'm open to just seeing what happens. And he told me that there had been a famous uh, photographer. I'm not going to mention his name, but he had been up and was with him for 4 days, and he just wanted to see wolves. And so he didn't want to stop and look at this and stop and look at this. He wanted to look at wolves. And at the end of the 4 days, he really missed quite a bit. And he didn't really get the close up with wolves. Wolves are pretty elusive, and getting a shot closer than what you see in the Lamar Valley is pretty unusual. So he got some wolf shots, but he missed a lot. And for me, because I was open to seeing what was there, I got to see bison. There were some bison stampedes as well. I got to see some coyote. This one was coming to a kill, a fresh kill. A moose, and moose usually aren't as common to see in Yellowstone as they are in Grand Teton, in my experience. And yeah, I saw a wolf. This was a young wolf pup who, if you observe animals long enough, you can tell the young because they kind of sit there and look like, what am I supposed to be doing? And that's exactly what he was doing. He was sitting very, very far away. This is a very cropped up photo. Just looking at us like, what are these people doing? And I finally found the red fox that I was looking for. So when you're patient and you wait for things to happen, you will often get rewarded in the wild. What are the best subjects to photograph? Do you have to go to Yellowstone or India? And I think I'm probably making the point that you don't really have to spend a lot of money on lenses and trips to get good photography. And oftentimes the best subjects are the ones that you know the best. It's not just the species that makes a good image. It's also the light, the composition, the behavior, the action, the perspective, and the creativity. So you're creating art, and whatever you have in front of you is the subject you're going to be creating art with. If you want to get an idea of interesting images, look at some of the contests. Look at things like NANPA, which is the North American Nature Photographers Association. Share the View, which is an international contest. Journal of Wildlife Photography, that's a member program that I've been loving. They have some wonderful trainings. Bird Photography of the Year, Audubon Photography Contest, Nature's Best. And notice that they're getting interesting dynamics, and they're not always going for exotic species. There are some, but there's an awful lot of things that are just neighborhood shots. So my point is, there's no bad or uninteresting wildlife, bird, or mammal to photograph. Local species can bring excellent images. When I think my first Best in Show was as a result of my being 30 minutes away from home at San Jacinto Wetlands, where I used to live close to there. And I think it was COVID. And so I got to experience for the first time the mating ritual of American avocets. And I'd always wanted to see it because I knew that they did something really special at the end, but I didn't know where exactly I would find that. And I was watching them, and all of a sudden I saw this, and I probably have, I don't know, a couple hundred pictures of this now. And this is the female getting in position before mating. And she leans down and she holds still in that position for maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer. She's very patient. And the male starts to preen himself and splash. And he does it in a sort of mild way first, and then he goes to the other side and he does it over there, and then he will do that like 6 or 8 times. And then when it gets really intense, he mounts. And when he mounts her, it's very gentle, and he levels himself down, and they have what's called a cloacal kiss, and that's the mate going on. And then when he unmounts, they cross beaks, and they walk about 3 or 4 steps cross beaked. And it's just, to me, it's just awesome to watch. And I didn't notice it until after a couple of times that I captured it, but he puts his wing over her when they walk. And it's just very endearing. And I believe that animals are not all that different from us. And it's things like this that make me feel that way when I see that they don't really need to do that to mate. This is tenderness between animals. And they're also not tender. They're very territorial. If you watch them when they're in the mating season, they fight off any intruder that comes close. And this is the Best in Show that came as a result of one of those territorial disputes. And I just happened to get 3 of them facing the same way with where you could see their eyes. This is the other Best in Show that I had, and that was 30 minutes from, well, it's 40 minutes from me now. It's 30 minutes from where I was when I first came up here. And that was a snowstorm, and hardly anybody was out. It was a big blizzard, and of course, being crazy about wildlife, I decided to go out and see how my short-eared owl was doing, and he was hunting, and I was against the end of the road, leaning against the car, and he just happened to hunt toward me. So, I mean, that was a thrilling action shot, but I didn't have to go very far to get it. I just had to be willing to stand in the cold. So let me talk a little bit to you about what is the best time. This is when. When is it that you will get the best wildlife photographs? The time of day is very important, and the best light occurs before you naturally want to get out of bed. And that's a fact you have to face. And sometimes I've gotten up at like 4:30 in Grand Teton to make sure that I'm at the place I want to be when it's sunrise. And light is very important as a photographer when you're outdoors and for wildlife as well as landscapes. It can make or break an image. It can turn sort of an ordinary situation into something compelling, or just take a wonderful situation and make it go flat. Mastering light is a hallmark of great wildlife photography or any nature photography. So when you want to go out is about 1 hour before sunrise to 2 hours after, and that's when you get that reflected broken light that brings reds and rosy pinks and golden yellows and oranges before you get the blue tones of daylight. So this was sunrise at Merced National Wildlife Refuge, and those are sandhill cranes. And by the way, you're going to find that species are more active in the morning and also at sunset. So that's another reason that those times, not only the beautiful light that you get in the morning or at sunset, but the behavior will be more interesting because they're going to be hungry. This is a yearling it's called Mount Blue Sky now. It used to be Mount Evans. It's like 14,000 feet where these mountain goats are. And it's the highest drivable road in the United States that you can get to. If you decide to go there sometime, make sure you do some preparation for altitude to get your body ready for altitude, because it's very stark, the difference to be at that altitude. This was San Jacinto Wildlife. Just an example of morning light and how it plays. This is Bandhavgarh National Park in the morning, in the sunrise. So the same thing is true for sunset. 1 or 2 hours before sunset and 1 hour after will bring all the beautiful tones of the scattered relay sunlight. Be careful not to pack it up too soon. And so a lot of people I see as the sun starts to go down and they leave, but there's going to be a last reflection of the sun against the horizon that's going to bring in some beautiful gold tones. So stay until that happens, because you could get some beautiful shots then. I think this one was taken at Bolsa Chica, but it's an older shot. This is Othello. We were there last year to see sandhill cranes. It's on the east side of Washington where they have sandhill crane festivals. But this is that light I'm talking about. You can see peach and light pink and sort of a soft yellow, purple, blue. It's just amazing what light does. And here's golden tones on the water. Another kind of light to look for is muted light. And I know in Southern California, you don't really get it quite as often as we do up here. But when you have overcast days or partly cloudy days, you get some really interesting light opportunities. Soft light will give everything a little more depth and texture, and you'll get more glow in the eyes than a harsher light. And it also creates beautiful backgrounds. Side light can help you highlight part of a bird or an animal in an interesting way. So this is an overcast day, and you can see how the detail just pops. And it also has this kind of soft background, that bokeh that is so pretty for a background for an image. This is side light, and it's almost a little too harsh here, but it just highlights, this is a pileated woodpecker. They're pretty common in my backyard now, but it just highlights that red crest. I've been trying really hard to get good flight shots of this bird, and he is wicked fast. And this this was in Grand Teton. This was a bear cub who mom had sent out, and she was going up the tree, but he was going away, and he just gave that backward glance at us, and the light just happened to catch his eye. The one thing you want to do is avoid harsh light. So if you can't see your shadow, it's time to go home. I think Paul Bannock was saying that he goes out in the morning, he goes home and rests, and then he goes out later in the day. And those are the best times to do wildlife photography. Also pay attention to seasons, because seasons will bring different species at different times. You know, the avocets are mating in the spring, there's fall migration. And so it's important to know and do some research on when is the species that you're interested in going to be there, what will they be doing, and that will make it a little easier for you to get a good image, good photo. So histogram, I'm going to tell myself here, when I first began photography, people I heard all the time, you know, pay attention to your histogram. And, you know, I thought, well, I looked at it and it just seemed like a lot to be looking at the image in the histogram. So I just always looked at my viewfinder. And when I went back, I saw most of my images before I started using my histogram are underexposed. I had to bring them up. I had to add shadows and bring up the light, because I wasn't paying attention to the good light. And the histogram is a wonderful tool to tell you when you're overexposed and when you're underexposed. You also want to be careful when you're photographing white birds, because white birds, if you don't underexpose, you will blow out their feathers. And if you want to get this kind of detail in white birds, or white animals for that matter, you want to pay attention to where your exposure is and just experiment, take it down, however you need to do that. I often use the exposure compensation to do that. All this beautiful feather in the snowy egret only will pop when you're at the right exposure. So you just want to make sure that you're not blowing things out. So where are the best places to find wildlife? You can find them close to where you are at a local wildlife refuge or in your backyard. You can research and see where species are by looking at eBird, Bird Dash, Google. Audubon has birding trails that will tell you a lot about where species are. And I think a lot of people look on social media as well. Social media has pros and cons, because if it's a really hot species and it's on social media, you're going to come into the photographer jam. So for example, up at Grand Teton, there'll be like 100 photographers lined up for the grizzlies when they come out. 399, I think her name is, and her cubs. And unless you have a really long lens, you're probably going to just end up with, you know, a medium shot of a bear, and you're going to be standing there in the middle of traffic, and it's not, for me, it's not what I find pleasurable when I go out and photograph in the wild. It's fine. I end up feeling bad for the rangers and the bears and the people who are trying to drive through. I go out to be in nature, but social media is a good place to find species at the same time. There's really not any poor subject to photograph. You can take a beautiful shot of a raven. And this was, I think, again at San Jacinto. I'm not exactly sure, but to me, if you have beautiful light and you have a nice background, it really almost doesn't matter what species it is. I don't know, somebody the other day said something about puffins are really ugly birds. And I was, what? I don't find they're unusual, but I don't know what an ugly bird is. I've just never seen one. A great egret. This was 30 minutes away from where I lived in California. So look for the beauty in what it is that you're looking at and see if you can capture that. Okay. You can also have a subject bucket list, and that's another way to figure out where you want to find something. And you may need to plan a trip to do that. And so I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of how to plan trips for wildlife. First of all, decide what it is you want to find, research and learn about where they can be found. What are their migration habits? So if you want to photograph sandhill cranes, but you find them at a place that they're going to be nesting, you're going to have a much harder time finding them than if you go to see them at an area where they're going to be mating, because they do some pretty fantastic dances when they're mating. So pay attention to not just where they are, but what they're doing when you're going there. Are you going to need some help to get to them by a boat, a plane, or a car? What is the busy season? So a lot of times there's birding festivals around busy seasons when a species flies in, warblers, sandhill cranes. I recommend that you don't book during that hot time because you're going to find it's much harder to get lodging and it's much harder to get access to where you want to go. Try to book more at the edges of those festival times. And then also determine how far ahead do you need to book to get a decent room. How do you hire a guide? Are all guides equal except for price? I don't think so. I think my recommendation is when you find a guide, I would suggest you find 2 or 3 to the area you're going with and talk with them on the phone and decide if this is somebody that you can learn from that's really going to be interested in you, if it's somebody who you feel like you can have a connection with. And for me, I have found the best guides are also kind of naturalists. They're people who know species, they know flora and fauna. They're teachers, and they tend to be, I don't know, a little more humble. I've just been with a couple of guides where I feel like, I'm on that trip to nurse somebody's ego, I guess. Don't forget to go to the zoo. That's a good place to find wildlife. This is a meerkat. And you can also find species at rehab centers. There are places that specialize in raptors, and they may, if you talk with them, they may let you come in and photograph them. Okay, so a little bit on how. This is equipment and settings part 1 of the how. When you're photographing outdoors, You want to make sure you have good clothes and attire as well as good equipment. And a lot of times I don't think people think about that. I see people in shoes that I worry they're going to twist their ankle because they don't have sturdy shoes. And that's a simple thing, but have a good sturdy pair of shoes. If you're in the heat, you can get UV protection. You can get smart clothes that have UV protection in them. Wear light layers, wear clothes that wick sweat, and get insect repellent. And bug nets, there's little bug nets you can put over your hat. I went to San Jacinto wetlands one time, and it gets pretty buggy there certain times a year. And I had, I didn't have short sleeves on, but I noticed I was getting bit a little bit. I had forgotten to put insect repellent on. I got home, I counted 100 bites on my arms. So those little things can make a difference to have a good experience or a not good experience. If you're in cold weather, you want to layer up, but make sure at least one layer has some kind of wool in it, smart wool, something that is meant for the cold. Because if you're, for example, in Yellowstone, I was there 4 days, but one day the wind was so bad and it just goes right through you. And if you don't have good protection, you're going to have trouble being flexible when you get cold. Cold stiffens people up. You want to have a good sturdy pair of boots. I like Sorels, and put Yax tracks on them. Yax tracks are like chains, tire chains for boots, and they'll help you with ice and snow. And they're different types. Some are made for ice and some are made for snow. I use fingerless gloves with silk liners, and the silk liners, I've never found a pair that doesn't sort of fall apart pretty easily, but they do help protect your fingers when they're exposed to the elements. And then I also have pads, kind of cuffs that go over the gloves, and put disposable hand warmers in them. But the thing that helps the most is, in the last couple of years we've been using them, is portable chargeable hand warmers. I think Zippo is a brand that makes them. We were just birding with our Audubon group over the weekend, and it was super, super cold. And I had mine in my pocket, and I ended up sharing them with people. And every time someone picked one up, they were like, oh, this is so nice. So if you're going to a cold place, make sure you have those. Use buffs for your neck and cover your head, because if your head is warm, the rest of your body will stay warmer. I like to take microfiber cleaning cloths and put them almost everywhere. I put them in my bag, I put them in my pockets, and I have them on my lens cover, tucked under the lens cover onto my lens. So if you're out and there's dust or there's moisture, that you can clean your lens and your viewfinder and your eyepiece, because if you have something at the end of your lens, it's going to, affect all of your images. Take knee pads. I started wearing knee pads quite a long time ago, but now I really need them. And it's important because a lot of the best shots, especially for shorebirds, is at eye level, and you need to get down low. So if you're standing and you see a potential shot that's low, you can get down on your knees quickly if you have knee pads, and you don't need expensive ones. You can also use a skimmer pod to balance your tripod. A skimmer pod is like a disc, and you could put your gimbal head in it, and it has all the same functions as your tripod, but it's just lower. It's even lower. And I also suggest that you take yoga mats along. We have small portable stools, sometimes like a director's chair, or a chair that's a little lower than that, just to help you to be low to the ground. Most of the avocet shots that I took, I was either lying on my stomach or I was sitting on a stool. And you know, when you're on your stomach, it has that nice effect of giving you a flat tummy. This is, I believe, a marble godwit at eye level at Moss Landing. So this would be a whole different image if it was taken from above, or I don't know if you could get much lower, but when a bird is in a bush, um, sometimes doing birds from below, they're just not as compelling and appealing. This is a long-tailed weasel, and I had to get on my knees because I was with my favorite guide up in Point Reyes, and he spotted this weasel, and he was acting crazy to bring in these quail, and there were around 6 quail, and they were approaching him, and they were getting closer and closer. And we got out of our car very quietly, but the quail took off, and he told me what the weasel does is he acts like he's crazy and gets their curiosity, and then when they get close enough, he reaches up and snatches one. And so I have a great understanding now of what the word weasel really means. And then he just kept popping up out of all the holes he had made in the environment, and I was able to capture him. Your equipment. I believe models and makes of camera are personal preference, that there's no perfect make of camera or lens that doesn't have some problems along with its strengths. You know, I've often admired Sony and, you know, some of the images that come from Sony, but Sony also goes through batteries a little quicker than Canon. It may be changing. And there's some great aftermarket lenses Tamron and Sigma make that do wonderful work. So what you end up getting depends on what you can afford and what you can carry. For the camera body, look for something that has 10 to 20 frames per second so you can capture movement. Also, look for higher megapixels if possible, so that when you crop, because you're going to be doing cropping as a bird photographer, you can save some of the quality of the image. But remember, when you have super high megapixels, one of the drawbacks of that is that it's going to fill up your card faster, and it's going to make downloading them a lot slower. Obviously, you need bigger lenses as a wildlife photographer. You can start with 70 to 200. There's 100s to 500, 200 to 600. And it really has a lot to do with what you can handle, what you can carry, and what you can afford. Canon has an 800 millimeter. It looks like a maximum millimeter because I have 3Ms there. And it's light, but it has an f11 aperture. So I think it's better for birds in flight, but that may be a personal preference for you to try as well. And a lot of times a good way to find out about a lens is rent it first and see how it feels and what you get when you're renting it. It's a lot cheaper than buying it and not being happy. Prime lenses can work beginning at 200 millimeters up to whatever you can lift and afford. Again, every lens will have drawbacks. Prime lenses are known for quality, but they're also very heavy and they're hard on the body. If you're going to become a dedicated wildlife lunatic, the flagship cameras, whether it's Nikon, Canon, Sony, their flagship models are usually weather sealed and they're hardier. And they're a good investment, but they're expensive. They're the most expensive. Teleconverters, I always take a 1.4 and a 2.0 with me. And with the R5 and the 100-500, I'm able to use both of those on the zoom lens without too much deterioration of quality. But in the past, on zoom lenses, I've had difficulty with 1.4 or 2.0 because the zooms generally don't have the same apprehension as a prime lens. I shoot with a 400 millimeter 2.8, and it has beautiful light apprehension in the lens, and so I can stay longer than a lot of photographers when it's getting dark because and it's faster. So the lower the aperture in the lens, the faster that lens is going to be because it has more light to work with. Keep in mind that most of the time when you have a teleconverter that it's going to reduce the speed. I recommend that you use a tripod. I know even with carbon fiber, they get kind of hefty to carry around, but it's going to make a difference in how sharp your image is. And I do a lot of hand holding, and a lot of the lenses I have good image stabilization, but you'll always get a sharper shot with a tripod if you can, take that along with you. And also you can use your car as a stabilizer. So if you're like at the wetlands and you lean up against the car, it's going to work as a tripod for you and give you a little more stabilization. Whatever you can do to stabilize your shot will help you to increase sharpness. Most wildlife photographers shoot in manual or aperture priority. You can set your ISO to auto in manual. I don't know if you can do it in aperture priority, but you can in manual. And I always set exposure compensation just one stop above the middle of the exposure compensation meter, and then select shutter speed and aperture. For blurred backgrounds called bokeh, if you set your f-stop at the widest aperture that you can, you're more likely to get that, but you have to keep in mind with birds and animals that when you set a wide aperture, you can also risk the possibility of cutting off some of the bird or the animal while you're doing that. So you have to find that sweet spot where you don't cut off the bird. And when you have more than one bird and you want to get them both in clearly, you need to increase, okay, I'm going to do this, increase the shutter speed. Okay, you need to change your shutter speed. I'm going to have to come back to that because I forgot. Now, what is it that I do? I think I lower the shutter speed. But you can't be at the same shutter speed because you're going to get, and the same f-stop because you're not going to get them in both in focus. Sorry, I can't remember that. Aperture priority allows your camera to auto-select the optimal shutter speed based on the amount of light. And then you're going to determine the aperture you need for the maximum light apprehension within the histogram parameters. There's no right or wrong in this. If you like aperture priority, that's fine. If you like manual, that's fine. It's about what fits for you with your style and your camera. The only way you're going to really figure it out, and this took me a long time to actually figure it out myself, is you're going to have to practice. You're just going to have to try this and try this and try these settings, and then you get to the sweet spot. But there's no one thing that's going to fit in every situation because every situation is going to be different when you're doing wildlife. I usually start around 1/1250 for a medium-sized bird or even a larger bird. I may go a little lower depending on the size and how fast it is, and then up to 1/1600, and then maybe even 1/2500 if it's a hummingbird. You also want to make sure that you have on your camera settings like, and I'm sure, other people who are going to be teaching wildlife photography will tell you this, you have to have it on the high speed continuous or low speed continuous settings and servo settings instead of focus. And that's Canon, and I believe Nikon has a different term for it, but it can't be single shot. Well, it can be, but you're probably going to lose it if you do. Okay, field practice. So when you're in the field, it's about looking around and finding interesting things. You want to look when you're taking an image, not just at the bird, but you want to see the background. And this is probably one of the big distinguishing skills of excellent wildlife photographers is they're taking in the whole picture. They're looking at what is at the edges, how much complication there is in the background, and they'll even wait for a bird or an animal to move to an area that's going to get a better shot. For me, my particular style, I don't mind nature in my images. But I find nature beautiful, so I don't mind a little bit of grass in the image. Learn to wait and be patient. Don't flush animals and birds. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And then practice how to be invisible when you're in the field. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well in a moment. So this is something that I want you to pay attention to is backgrounds. These images would probably just be normal. I think the kestrel might be a nice image, but the background really makes it. And the same thing with the ibis. The ibis, the beautiful iridescent colors of a white-faced ibis just pop against those white, I don't even know what they are. This was at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And I just had 2 seconds to get that shot because they move fast. This is a peregrine falcon up at Point Furman, where a lot of photographers, when I was in California, a lot of photographers went there, and they happened to have a beautifully colored brush along some of the mountains around there, and they make a really beautiful background. Other than that, it's just, to me, it's just a bird, but that background just makes the image. Okay, the practice of using a sit spot. This is something that birders have done for years. It's very simple. You just find a spot, a tree, around trees or bushes, preferably. You can be out in the open, but birds are much more likely and animals to notice you when you're out in the open. But someplace where you can be camouflaged, hopefully in camouflage kind of clothing. And I don't mean you have to wear camo, but bright white or clothes that make you stand out will be noticed by birds. And just take a seat, be comfortable, look at what are the nice backgrounds in the area, put your tripod up because you're going to be there for a while, and just get ready and sit and watch. I taught some photography workshops this year and last year and the year before, and the students were just amazed at how much more they could get if they just sat still. And I see a lot of photographers who just pursue birds, and maybe they get a shot or two, but they're missing out on what you can get when you become part of the environment. Birds and wildlife will relax and not see you as a threat. And you'll find they move more into your area and even sometimes right in front of you. But you have to be patient. And blinds are another way of being in the field that is less threatening. But you can also use your car for a blind. And you can have a blind in the backyard as well. There's Tropagon specializes in photography blinds, and they now have a single blind where they have a chair that you can buy from them, 2 different levels, and the blind that goes over the chair, and you can just sit there with your coffee in the backyard in the blind and get some excellent shots. Things to avoid in the field: pursuing birds, flushing birds. And what I mean by that is, when there's a group of ducks or something and you flush them, every time that you flush birds, you're causing them stress because they have to use calories that they may not have. And so it's creating stress for them. The practice of pursuing animals and birds causes stress, and they get distracted, and then they get threatened by our presence. And it also interferes with their ability to hunt or breed or rest. The same thing is true for baiting animals. And I just recently had, I went through several things to find a good non-baiting owl photographer in Alberta, Canada. But my first guide that I found, I was told he didn't bait, and he told me he didn't bait. But then I learned from Paul Bannock, who's an owl. He's a prolific author and photographer of owls, and he does a lot of talks at bird festivals. And he told me that this guy actually follows the people who bait the owls. So that's how he knows where the owls are. You have to be very careful when people tell you that they know how to find owls or they know where they are, because owls are elusive. And when birds become habituated to people and to being fed, they end up dead. A lot of times, there's lots of examples in Grand Teton and Yellowstone of fox and I think bears that have been habituated, and they have to terminate them. They consider them nuisance animals. And birds that have been habituated, like owls, will often get close to the street and they get hit by cars. And you don't see that because it's going to happen after you're gone. But for me, I won't participate in that because I never think that my image is more important than the life that I'm taking a picture of. When I was up in Yellowstone, I had 4 days with somebody told me about the great gray owl, and there were quite a few that had nested. This was a couple years ago. And I had about 5 different experiences, all with different kinds of photographers. 2 were just stellar. We kept our places, we stayed back, and we watched the owl hunt. I got pictures with a vole. I got diving pictures and coming up pictures and beautiful portraits like this. Then this is actually a picture on the last day that I was there. And when I drove up, I saw there were about 20 photographers, and they kept walking toward the great gray owl, and the owl's looking at them, and then he moves a little further, and then they keep going, and he moves a little further, and this is finally his exit. So the thing is, you really don't need to do that to get a good image. Unfortunately, I found when you're in the field, there's no real use talking to people because they're going to do what they're going to do. And I've had people throw Costco drumsticks out at foxes, so they would come up and they could get a picture. And I tried to say, you're really not supposed to feed wild animals, and they'll tell me they're not wild animals. So, people are going to do what they're going to do. I think this is San Jacinto. This is a flock of white-faced ibis. Fortunately, if you are an ethical wildlife photographer, you get better images, and the animals won't get so stressed. So here's an example of becoming invisible. We were walking on the upland trail, and it was snowy on the ground, and I noticed a varied thrush, and it's one of the birds that I really wanted to get photos up of when I came up here. So there was a kind of a conifer tree close by. This was a crabapple, Pacific crabapple tree that they were in, and I got behind sort of to the side of the conifer, set up my tripod, and I just waited. And they got really comfortable, and they came down and they were just eating these crab apples in front of me. And this one I entered in Audubon, and it was featured in, it was a contest winner in a category called Plants for Birds. It's part of the Audubon photography, but it's a separate category. And I just love that arch. But that was a bird that was totally comfortable with my presence. Okay, the final thing is your why. Like, what are the reasons that you're taking pictures in the first place? Three main reasons that people get attracted to photography. One is love of subject matter, one is love of art, and one is love of technology. Which one is your strength? Pay attention to what is your strength. Which one is your weakness? And pay attention to that. If you want to be a good photographer, you need to work on your weak area, and everybody has one. When I first learned this, I was in a workshop, and the instructor said this. And of course, I raised my hand for subject matter, and I also raised my hand for art. And when he asked about love of technology, I thought, well, nobody's going to raise their hand. And a third of the class also raised their hand for that. And it changed my understanding that people also love the technology. And there are people who are so good at it, but they have to struggle with some of the other things. And because there's so much technology and it is my weak area, it was a surprise for me to see that some people just love that part of photography. And remember, your first 10,000 photographs are your worst. You need to practice. And don't forget to have fun. And I think that's the end. So I'm okay with questions. How am I doing on time?
And this is incredible.
Oh, yeah?
Wowzers. What
Oh,
beautiful images. Oh my, oh my, oh my. Okay, guys, feel free to unmute yourself and fire away. Anne is available for questions. There's just so many things to cover.
so should I leave this up? And by the way, because I've outed myself as being really poor at technology, I'm going to tell you this would not have happened if Bruce hadn't helped me, because I did not know how to do PowerPoint. So thank you, Bruce, very
You're very welcome.
much. Okay, so should I close this down and just go back to Zoom then?
Yes, please. You could stop sharing, and I'm going to stop the recording.
Stop sharing. Okay, got it.